Close your eyes and imagine that the year is 1347. You are not a king or a noble, but a simple peasant living in a small timber-framed hut in the heart of Europe. As the sun dips below the horizon, you feel a primal fear that your modern mind has long forgotten. In this world, darkness is not just the absence of light, it is a living, breathing entity that swallows the world whole. You have no flickering LED lights, no glowing smartphone screens, and no street lamps outside your window. Your only defense against the absolute blackness of a medieval night is a single guttering tallow candle made from animal fat that smells of death and rot. You watch the flame flicker and realize that for the next 12 hours, you are a prisoner of the shadows. You crawl into a bed that is little more than a wooden box filled with straw, sharing the cramped space with your spouse, your children, and perhaps even a stray goat or pig brought inside to protect them from the cold and the wolves outside. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and damp earth. You pull a heavy, moth-eaten wool blanket to your chin and wait for the first sleep to take you. This is the beginning of a rhythm that would seem like a haunting ritual to anyone from the 21st century. You drift off as the village bells toll the end of the day, but your rest is far from peaceful. In the medieval mind, sleep is a dangerous bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the supernatural. As you fall deeper into your first slumber, you are terrified of the nightmare. To you, this isn't just a bad dream. It is a literal demonic entity, a heavy, invisible weight that climbs onto your chest in the dead of night, pinning you down and stealing your breath. You feel the crushing pressure on your lungs, unable to scream or move, convinced that a creature from the depths of hell is trying to drag your soul away while you are defenseless. This experience, which we now call sleep paralysis, is your reality, and it is why you never expect to sleep through the night. Then, suddenly, you are wide awake. It is midnight. The house is silent, except for the rustle of straw and the rhythmic breathing of your family. This is the watch, the mysterious interval between your two sleeps that defines medieval existence. You don't feel tired or groggy. Instead, your mind is remarkably sharp, your senses heightened by the total silence of the world outside. You sit up in the pitch black and feel the cold air bite at your skin. This hour belongs to you. In this sacred, eerie gap of time, you do things that would baffle a modern doctor. You might stay in bed and whisper long, repetitive prayers to protect your family from the plague and the devil. You might strike a flint to relight a small lamp and read a few pages of a forbidden manuscript if you are among the few who can read. Or you might simply talk. You and your partner share secrets in the dark, discussing the harvest, the cruelty of the local lord, or the strange dreams that visited you during the first sleep. Sometimes, you hear a knock on the heavy oak door. It is your neighbor. In the medieval world, the midnight hour is a social one. You might walk through the unlit village streets, guided only by the moon, to visit a friend. You sit by their hearth, sharing a cup of weak ale and whispering about the latest gossip or the fear of a coming war. There is a strange, quiet intimacy to these midnight meetings that the modern world has lost forever. But the darkness outside the walls is never far from your mind. You know that beyond the village fence, the forests are prowled by outlaws, wolves, and, as the stories say, spirits that have no place among the living. The watch is a time of reflection, a time when the veil between this world and the next is at its thinnest. You feel the weight of eternity pressing in on your small hut. Eventually, you feel the familiar pull of exhaustion returning. The second sleep is calling. This sleep is different. It is deeper, heavier, and often lasts until the first gray light of dawn breaks over the fields. As you settle back into the straw, you feel a sense of accomplishment. You have survived the midnight terrors. You have navigated the watch. When you wake again, the world will be loud and chaotic, filled with the back-breaking labor of the fields and the demands of the church. But for now, in the silence of the second sleep, you are safe. You are part of a human rhythm that lasted for centuries, a biphasic cycle that kept our ancestors in tune with the natural world in a way we can no longer imagine. You close your eyes, the smell of tallow still lingering in the air, and let the darkness take you one last time before the sun demands your return to the brutal reality of the Middle Ages. You feel the straw of your mattress poking through your thin linen tunic, a constant reminder of the humble life you lead under the shadow of the Manor Lord. The darkness is so thick you can almost taste it, a mix of damp earth and the metallic tang of the cold night air. You reach out your hand, but you cannot even see your own fingers. This is the great silence of the Middle Ages, a time when the world feels like it has ceased to exist, leaving only you and your thoughts. You remember the stories the village elders told you by the fire about the spirits that roam the woods after sunset, and you wonder if they are watching you right now through the cracks in your wattle and daub walls. Your breathing slows as you try to find the first sleep, but your mind is a battlefield of superstitions. You have placed a small iron knife under your pillow, a common charm to ward off the fairies and mischievous spirits that love to steal the breath of the unwary. You also have a pouch of dried salt tucked near your chest, because everyone knows the devil cannot count the grains of salt and will be distracted if he tries to enter your soul through your dreams. As exhaustion finally claims you, your subconscious enters a state of primal survival. This first sleep is not the peaceful rest of the modern world. It is a heavy, defensive slumber. Suddenly, your eyes snap open. The air in the room is even colder now, and the silence is broken only by the low, rhythmic grunting of the pig in the corner and the soft rustle of your children stirring in their sleep. You have reached the watch. You feel a strange electric clarity in your brain that modern science will one day call the surge of prolactin, but to you, it is simply a gift from God. You sit up slowly, your joints aching from the day's labor in the fields. You don't reach for a light because you don't need one. You know every inch of this tiny room by touch. You begin your midnight orisons, whispering the paternoster over and over, your voice a rhythmic drone in the dark. You pray for the souls in purgatory, for the health of your livestock, and for protection against the hidden effluvia that you believe causes the plague. You feel a profound connection to the divine in this hour, as if the heavens are leaning down just to hear your humble plea. But there is also a practical side to this midnight awakening. You feel the urge to relieve yourself, and you reach for the ceramic chamber pot kept beneath the bed. In the medieval mind, waste is not just filth. It is a source of protection. Some of your neighbors even keep a bowl of stale urine near the door, believing its sharp scent repels the evil eye and wandering ghosts. You move with practiced ease in the dark, your body attuned to the natural rhythms of the earth. You might hear the distant howl of a wolf or the screech of an owl, and you cross yourself, fearing it might be a shapeshifter or a witch flying to a secret sabbat. If the moon is bright enough, you might even peek through a small slit in the shutters to see the village transformed into a silver, ghostly landscape. You see the shadows of the church spire stretching like a long finger across the mud, and you feel a shiver of awe. You find yourself talking to your spouse, who has also woken up. In this quiet interval, you discuss the things that are too dangerous to say during the day. You whisper about the rising taxes, the rumors of a new war in the South, and your hopes for the next harvest. This is the only time you truly feel like an individual, away from the prying eyes of the priest or the bailiff. You might even share a small piece of hardtack or a sip of watered-down cider to settle your stomach. As the hour passes, the watch begins to fade, and a heavy, velvet-like drowsiness starts to envelop you. This is the signal for the second sleep, the deepest and most restorative phase of your night. You lie back down, tucking the coarse wool blanket around your family, feeling a sense of communal warmth. You are not alone in this darkness. Millions across the continent are doing exactly what you are doing, synchronized by a biological clock that has not yet been shattered by the invention of the light bulb. You let go of your fears, drifting into a dreamless void, knowing that when you wake again, the cock will crow, the bells will ring, and the brutal sun of the Middle Ages will demand your sweat and blood once more. You have conquered the night, and for a medieval peasant, that is the greatest victory of all. But the night in the Middle Ages is not just about silence. It is about the smells that define your existence. As you sit up during the watch, the stench of the tallow candle fills your lungs, a greasy animal fat odor that lingers on your skin for days. You look at the walls of your hut and see the dancing shadows created by the tiny flame, and your mind begins to play tricks on you. You remember the warnings of the local priest about the Prince of Darkness who rules the night. To you, the devil is not an abstract concept. He is a real physical threat who might be standing just outside your door, waiting for a moment of weakness to snatch your soul. To protect yourself, you reach for a bundle of dried St. John's wort hanging from the rafters. You believe that the scent of this herb is a holy barrier that no demon can cross. You might even rub a bit of mugwort on your temples, hoping it will grant you prophetic dreams, or at least keep the terrifying hags away from your bedside. The social hierarchy of the Middle Ages is also reflected in the way people sleep. While you are shivering in a pile of damp straw, the lord in the stone manor above the village is experiencing a different kind of nighttime misery. Even with his heavy velvet curtains and oversized feather beds, he is not safe. The great stone halls are conduits for freezing drafts, and his elaborate bed is often infested with bedbugs and lice that thrive in the expensive fabrics. He too wakes up for the first and second sleep, but his midnight hour might be spent dictating letters to a weary scribe or plotting political assassinations by the light of a wax candle, which is a luxury you will never afford. You feel a strange sense of equality in the darkness. Whether you are a king or a serf, the night treats you with the same cold indifference. In the city, the watch takes on a more chaotic tone. If you were a merchant in London or Paris, your midnight awakening would be greeted by the sound of heavy iron chains being pulled across the streets to prevent horsemen from charging through the darkness. You would hear the calls of the night watchmen, their lanterns swinging as they look for fires or brawlers. But even in the crowded city, the biological clock remains the same. People lean out of their overhanging wooden windows to pour their night soil into the gutters below, a hazardous ritual for anyone walking the streets during the watch. You might hear the distant chanting from a nearby monastery, where monks are performing the office of matins, their voices rising in a haunting Gregorian chant that echoes through the empty alleys. They believe their prayers are the only thing keeping the world from falling into chaos while the rest of humanity sleeps. As you prepare to enter the second sleep, you think about the dreams you've had. In your world, a dream is never just a dream. It is a message, a warning, or a glimpse into the future. If you saw a black dog in your first sleep, you spend the watch in a state of terror, convinced that death is coming for a member of your family. If you saw a golden bird, you feel a surge of hope that the next harvest will be bountiful. The intensity of your emotions during this midnight gap is something the modern world can never replicate. Your mind is not cluttered with the constant noise of information. It is focused entirely on the survival of your body and the salvation of your soul. You lie back down, feeling the warmth of your youngest child pressed against your side. The second sleep is a heavy curtain falling over your consciousness, a dark mercy that allows you to forget the hunger and the toil for a few more hours. You surrender to the void, unaware that centuries later, people will look back at your broken nights with a mix of horror and fascination, unable to understand how you found peace in a world so filled with shadows. The rooster's crow doesn't just signal the start of a new day, it drags you out of your second sleep and forces you to confront a reality that would make a modern person gag. You push back the heavy, lice-ridden wool blanket, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. It is a suffocating mixture of stale sweat, damp straw, and the pungent ammonia from the chamber pot sitting just inches from your head. You don't reach for a toothbrush or a bottle of filtered water. Instead, you perform your first ritual of the morning. You check your skin for new bites. Bedbugs, fleas, and lice are your constant companions, and a morning spent without scratching is a luxury you cannot imagine. You stand up, your feet sinking into the rushes on the floor, which haven't been changed in months, hiding layers of spilled ale, discarded bones, and animal waste. To clean your face, you don't use soap. Soap is an expensive commodity, reserved for the wealthy or for washing clothes. Instead, you splash your eyes with a bit of cold water from a wooden bucket, and if you are feeling particularly vain, you might use a piece of rough linen to scrub the grime from your teeth. But for many in medieval Europe, the morning wash is far more bizarre. You have heard the old wives' tales that washing your hair too often opens the pores to the plague, so you keep your head covered in a linen coif, trapping weeks of oil and dust against your scalp. If you are a woman of the village, you might reach for a bowl of stale urine. To your modern ears, this sounds like a nightmare, but to a medieval mind, urine is a powerful cleansing agent because of its ammonia content. You use it to spot clean your finest linen, or even as a facial wash to brighten the complexion and kill the parasites living in your pores. You then dress in the same wool garments you have worn for the last 6 months without a single wash. To you, cleanliness is not about the body. It is about the soul. You believe that as long as your white linen undershirt is somewhat bright, you are presentable to God and your neighbors. The streets outside are no better than the interior of your hut. As you step out into the morning mist, you are navigating a literal minefield of filth. There are no sewers here. The central gutter of the street, known as the kennel, is overflowing with the night soil thrown from upper windows and the blood from the local butcher's stall. You watch a stray pig feast on a pile of rotting vegetable scraps in the middle of the path and realize this is your sanitation department. Your morning commute to the fields is a struggle against the mud that clings to your heavy leather boots, mud that is more animal excrement than earth. You pass the local well, the heart of the community, and notice the green slime growing on the bucket. You drink from it anyway, unaware that the seepage from the nearby churchyard is poisoning the very water that sustains you. If you are a wealthy merchant in the city, your morning is slightly different, but no less revolting. You might own a dry washcloth infused with rosewater or lavender to mask the scent of your own body. But underneath the silk and fur, your skin is a map of sores and rashes. You use a small silver ear scoop to remove wax, a ritual you perform with great pride in front of your servants. You might even use a mixture of crushed eggshells and charcoal to rub against your blackened teeth, hoping to stave off the rot that claims most people's mouths by the age of 30. But the overarching fear remains the same for everyone: the fear of water. You have been told by the greatest physicians of the age that bathing in hot water weakens the heart and allows the miasma of disease to enter your blood. So, you remain encrusted in a layer of historical filth, a protective shell of grime that defines the very essence of being alive in the Middle Ages. You look at your blackened fingernails and see not dirt, but the mark of a hard-working soul, ready to face another day of brutal survival in a world where the very concept of germs is 1,000 years away. By the time the sun is high in the sky, your stomach is screaming for its first meal. But in medieval Europe, your relationship with food is a dangerous game of Russian roulette. You reach for a loaf of maslin bread, a dark, heavy brick made from a mixture of rye and wheat. This bread is the backbone of your existence, accounting for nearly 80% of your daily calories. But take a closer look at the grain before it was ground into flour. If the summer was particularly wet, the rye might have been infected with a tiny purple-black fungus called ergot. You don't know it, but this fungus contains alkaloids similar to LSD. As you swallow that crusty piece of bread, you are unknowingly microdosing on a powerful hallucinogen. Within hours, you might feel a burning sensation in your limbs, a condition you call St. Anthony's fire. Your skin begins to blister, and you might start seeing demons dancing in the fields or hearing the voices of angels screaming from the trees. Whole villages have been known to fall into a state of mass hysteria, dancing until they collapse from exhaustion or accusing their neighbors of witchcraft, all because of a moldy loaf of bread. To wash down this psychedelic meal, you don't reach for a glass of water. As we've established, the water in your village is a cocktail of bacteria and waste. Instead, you drink ale, and you drink it in massive quantities. Even the children start their day with a mug of small beer. This isn't the cold, filtered lager you know today. It is a thick, cloudy, and lukewarm soup of fermented grain. It provides the essential vitamins and hydration you need to survive the brutal labor of the day. Because the brewing process involves boiling the liquid, it is the only thing safe to drink. This means that for most of your adult life, you are living in a state of permanent, mild intoxication. The entire social fabric of the Middle Ages is held together by a thin veil of alcohol. From the priest in the pulpit to the blacksmith at his anvil, everyone is slightly buzzed. But the diet of a peasant is a monotonous cycle of pottage. This is a thick stew that sits in a cauldron over the fire for days or even weeks. You simply add whatever you can find: a few withered leeks, a handful of dried peas, and if you are lucky, a small piece of salted pork fat. There are no spices to mask the taste of decay. Those are luxuries for the nobility who use black pepper and cinnamon to flaunt their wealth. You eat with your fingers or a wooden spoon, sharing a common bowl with your family. The concept of a balanced diet is non-existent. During the long winters, scurvy begins to rot your gums because you haven't seen a fresh vegetable in months. You look at the wealthy lords who feast on roasted swan and venison, but even they suffer. Their obsession with meat and their disdain for peasant food, like vegetables, gives them agonizing gout. In this world, your stomach is either a temple of holy intoxication or a victim of a silent, fungal killer. But the true horror of your daily bread isn't just the rot you can see, it's the invisible poison lurking within the grain. You have seen your neighbors succumb to the holy fire, and the sight is one you will never forget. It starts with a strange tingling in the fingers, a sensation like thousands of insects crawling under your skin. Then comes the burning, a heat so intense you would plunge your arms into a frozen stream just to feel a moment of relief. In the worst cases, the poison constricts your blood vessels until your limbs turn black and shrivel like charcoal. You watch in terror as a man's hand literally falls off, dead and dry, while he is still conscious and screaming for mercy. The village priest tells you it is a punishment from God for your hidden sins, but the truth is much simpler. It is just the rye. This dancing plague isn't a myth. You have seen a dozen people in the market square leaping and twirling in a silent, agonizing trance. They aren't dancing for joy. They are trapped in a biological nightmare, their brains firing in a chaotic storm of ergot-induced madness. While you struggle with your tainted crust, the world of the nobility is a different kind of dietary disaster. You look up at the castle on the hill and imagine the luxury of their feasts, but their plates are filled with vanity rather than health. A medieval banquet is a theater of the absurd, designed to showcase power through the consumption of the impossible. You might see a cockatrice, a monstrous creation where the front half of a pig is sewn to the back half of a chicken. They eat peacocks with their feathers reattached and gilded with gold leaf, consuming heavy metals that slowly poison their nervous systems. Because they believe fresh vegetables are cold and dangerous for a refined stomach, they suffer from chronic constipation and agonizing kidney stones. Their teeth are often more decayed than yours because they have access to the ultimate luxury, sugar from the East. They coat their meat in honey and thick, sugary sauces, creating a breeding ground for bacteria that turns their smiles into black pits of rot. You, on the other hand, rely on your small ale to keep your spirits high and your body hydrated. The brewing is done by the alewives, the women of the village who balance a broomstick over their door to signal a fresh batch is ready. This ale is thick enough to be a meal in itself, filled with yeast and B vitamins that are the only thing keeping you from starving. You drink it from a communal wooden tankard, passing it around the table and sharing more than just a beverage. You are sharing the germs of your entire family, a constant cycle of reinfection that keeps your immune system in a state of perpetual war. As the sun begins to set and the effects of the alcohol in the grain settle into your bones, you realize your stomach is never truly at peace. In the Middle Ages, every bite is a gamble between survival and a slow, agonizing descent into madness or disease. You finish your pottage, scraping the bottom of the wooden bowl, and pray that the bread you eat tomorrow won't be the one that sets your soul on fire. As the last traces of the second sleep leave your body, you are not met with the promise of a new day, but with the crushing weight of your reality. You are a serf, a human being bound to the very soil you walk upon, a piece of living property in the grand hierarchy of the feudal system. Your life is governed by the manorial court, and every breath you take is taxed, measured, and owned by the Lord on the hill. The morning air is biting, but you don't have time to feel the cold as you grab your heavy wooden plow. This is the weak work, the 3 days of every week that you must spend laboring on the Lord's domain before you can even touch your own small strip of land. You are a prisoner of the seasons, driven by a calendar that demands your blood, sweat, and tears in exchange for a meager existence. You spend your hours behind an ox, your feet sinking deep into the cold, gray mud that seems to want to swallow you whole. Your back is a map of chronic pain, a constant ache from leaning over the earth for 12, 14, or even 16 hours a day. There is no such thing as a weekend, and there is no such thing as retirement. In the eyes of the law, you are barely more than the livestock you tend, and your only escape is the ringing of the church bells. But even your faith comes with a price, as you are forced to give 10% of everything you produce to the church as a tithe. You watch the grain you worked so hard to harvest being carted away to the tithe barn, leaving you with barely enough to keep your children from starving through the winter. The absurdity of the feudal laws is a constant shadow over your life. You cannot grind your own grain. You must pay a fee to use the Lord's mill, and if you are caught using a hand mill at home, the bailiffs will break it into pieces. You cannot hunt for a rabbit in the forest to feed your hungry family, as that is poaching, a crime punishable by heavy fines or even the loss of a hand. Even your marriage is not your own, as you must pay a fee called merchet to the Lord just for the right to let your daughter wed. You live in a world where the sun and the stars are your only clock, and the overseer's whip is the only rhythm you know. As the sun finally begins to set, your shadow stretches long and thin across the furrowed earth, reflecting your own exhaustion. You walk back to your cramped hut, your hands calloused and bleeding, knowing that you have produced enough wealth to feed 1,000 kings, yet you will go to bed hungry. This is the burden of the medieval peasant, a life of relentless toil that has been erased from the romantic stories of knights and ladies. You are the silent engine of the Middle Ages, the one who feeds the world while suffering in the dirt. You close your eyes, the smell of damp earth still in your nostrils, knowing that tomorrow, the cycle of the plow and the tax will begin all over again. But the true cruelty of your existence isn't just the labor you perform while you are alive. It is how the Lord owns you even after you take your final breath. You live in constant fear of the Harriet, the most cold-blooded tax in the medieval world. When a head of a household dies, the law demands that the family hand over their best beast, usually their strongest ox or their most productive cow, to the Lord. Imagine your children standing in the mud, weeping over the body of their father, only to watch the Lord's bailiff lead away the only animal that could have saved them from starvation. It is a system designed to keep you in a cycle of perpetual poverty, ensuring that no peasant family can ever accumulate enough wealth to dream of freedom. And then there is the tallage, a tax that the Lord can levy whenever he feels like it, for any reason or no reason at all. If the Lord needs to pay a ransom for his son, or if he simply wants to build a new tower on his castle, he tallages his serfs. You have no voice, no vote, and no right to refuse. You simply reach into your meager savings and hand over the coins you were saving for the winter. You are also bound by multure, the law that forces you to use the Lord's oven to bake your bread. If you try to bake a small loaf over your own hearth to save a few pennies, the smoke from your chimney becomes a snitch, and you will find yourself standing before the manorial court, facing a fine that could ruin you. The physical toll of this life is etched into your very bones. Historians who examine medieval skeletons find spines twisted by years of heavy lifting and teeth worn down to the gums by the grit and sand found in the Lord's poorly milled flour. You are old at 30, and a village elder at 40 is considered a miracle. Yet, in the rare moments of rest, perhaps sitting on a stone wall as the sun dips below the horizon, you feel a flicker of defiance. You hear whispers of the Great Rising, stories of peasants in other lands who burned the manorial rolls and demanded to be treated as men rather than cattle. But for now, those are just stories whispered in the dark of the watch. You pick up your heavy wooden shovel, your muscles screaming in protest, and prepare for the final hour of toil. In the Middle Ages, your sweat is the gold that builds the cathedrals, and your blood is the ink that writes the history of kings. You are the foundation of a world that refuses to acknowledge your humanity, a silent ghost haunting the very fields that keep the world alive. If you think the labor in the fields is the most dangerous part of your life, you haven't yet fallen ill in the 1300s. In the Middle Ages, the doctor's office is not a place of healing, but a chamber of horrors that would make a modern surgeon faint. You wake up with a pounding headache and a raging fever, and your first instinct is not to reach for a pill, but to call for the barber surgeon. Yes, the same man who cuts your hair and trims your beard is also the man who will plunge a cold iron blade into your vein. He believes in the four humors, a theory that your body is a vessel for blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. To him, your fever means you have too much life in your veins, and the only cure is to let it out. You watch as he ties a leather strap around your arm, the same arm that labored for the Lord yesterday, and prepares to drain your life force into a pewter bowl. You feel the sharp sting of the lancet, and as the dark, thick blood flows out, you are told that your soul is being purified. If the bleeding doesn't work, he might reach for a jar of hungry, writhing leeches to finish the job. You lie there, becoming paler and weaker, while the physician nods in approval, convinced that the balance of your humors is being restored. But bloodletting is the gentlest of the medieval cures. If you are suffering from a demon in the brain or a persistent seizure, the surgeon might suggest trepanning. Without a single drop of anesthetic, you are pinned down to a wooden table by 4 strong men. You hear the rhythmic scraping sound of a hand-cranked drill as it slowly eats its way through your skull. The pain is an explosion of white light in your mind, but the surgeon assures you that the hole in your head is a doorway for the evil spirits to escape. You are left with a permanent window into your brain, covered only by a thin layer of skin, if you are lucky enough to survive the inevitable infection. The ingredients of medieval medicine are even more revolting than the procedures. If you have a persistent cough, you might be prescribed a syrup made from crushed snails and honey. For a wound that refuses to heal, the doctor might apply a poultice of warm cow dung and moldy bread, unknowingly creating a breeding ground for tetanus. But the ultimate miracle cure is something called mummy. You are forced to swallow a bitter powder made from the ground-up remains of ancient corpses stolen from tombs in the East. They believe the life essence of the dead can heal the living, turning your stomach into a graveyard in the hopes of saving your skin. You live in a world where the cure is often more lethal than the disease, and every visit from a doctor is a flirtation with the grave. As the surgeon packs his blood-stained tools, you are left to pray that your body is stronger than his medicine. In the Middle Ages, survival is not a matter of science. It is a desperate, bloody miracle. But the horrors of the barber surgeon's table are only half the story, For the true madness lies in the miasma theory that governs your every breath. You walk through the streets of a plague-ridden city and see a figure that looks like a giant demonic bird stalking through the mist. This is the plague doctor, clad in a heavy leather cloak coated in wax and wearing a terrifying mask with a long, pointed beak. You are told that the beak is stuffed with dried roses, lavender, and spices to filter out the bad air, or miasma, that causes death. To you, the stench of rotting garbage and open sewers is the smell of the plague itself, and you carry a bouquet of flowers or a posy constantly pressed to your nose. You don't realize that the real killers are the tiny fleas on the rats scurrying beneath your feet, not the smell of the air. The doctor uses a long wooden cane to examine you without touching your skin, poking at the black, swollen buboes in your groin and armpits. If he finds one, his treatment is to break it open and apply a warm poultice made of onion, butter, and, believe it or not, the backside of a plucked live chicken. They believe the chicken will draw out the poison from your blood, but in reality, it only speeds up your agonizing end. The medieval pharmacy is a place where the line between medicine and witchcraft completely disappears. If you are suffering from a broken bone that refuses to knit, you might be told to seek out gladiator's sweat, or the moss grown on the skull of a dead criminal. There is a thriving black market for mellified man, a legendary substance created by soaking a human corpse in honey for 100 years until it turns into a medicinal candy. You are told that eating this human preserve will give you eternal vitality, a belief that turns even the most pious Christians into accidental cannibals. For the wealthy, Theorak is the ultimate defense against all poisons. A complex concoction containing 64 different ingredients, including the flesh of venomous vipers and high doses of opium. It doesn't cure you, but it keeps you in a drug-induced stupor while your body either fights off the infection or slowly shuts down. Even surgery for the most basic ailments is a death sentence. If you have a bladder stone, a common result of your poor diet, you undergo lithotomy. You are bound in a position known as the lithotomy position, your legs pulled back to your chest, while a surgeon cuts into your most sensitive areas with a dull knife. There is no cleaning of the tools between patients. The blood of the man before you is still wet on the blade that now enters your body. In this world, the hospital is not a place to get well, but a Hotel Dieu, a house of God where you go to confess your sins and prepare for the afterlife. You look at the crucifix on the wall as the surgeon reaches for his saw, realizing that in the Middle Ages, faith is the only anesthetic you will ever have. You close your eyes, praying that the next world is kinder than the one that tries to heal you with blood, bile, and the bones of the dead. In the Middle Ages, your clothes are not meant to keep you comfortable. They are a loud, visual scream of your social status. If you are a nobleman walking through the muddy streets of London, you are likely wearing Krakows, shoes with toes so long they look like the beak of a prehistoric bird. These points can reach up to 24 inches, making it physically impossible to walk up a flight of stairs without tripping over your own vanity. To manage this, you use thin silver chains to tie the tips of your shoes to your knees, a fashion statement that tells everyone you are so wealthy. You don't ever need to perform manual labor. The church denounces these shoes as Satan's claws, claiming they prevent you from kneeling in prayer, but the higher the nobility, the longer the toe. For a medieval woman, the quest for beauty is a slow and painful process of transformation. You don't want a low, thick hairline. Instead, you desire a high, domed forehead, which is seen as a sign of aristocratic intelligence and purity. To achieve this, you take a pair of tweezers and painstakingly pluck every single hair from your front hairline, inch by inch, until your forehead reaches the middle of your skull. You might even rub caustic lime on your skin to ensure the hair never grows back, risking chemical burns just to look like the pale, egg-like ideal of beauty featured in illuminated manuscripts. Your eyebrows are next, plucked until they are almost invisible, leaving your face looking like a blank, ghostly canvas. The obsession with unnatural shapes extends to every part of the body. As a man of the court, you wear doublets stuffed with horsehair or grain to create a peascod belly, a rounded silhouette that makes you look like you are permanently puffed out with pride. You wear hose so tight they reveal every muscle of your legs, often padding your calves with extra fabric to simulate the athletic build of a knight, even if you've never held a sword in your life. Your clothes are held together by hundreds of tiny pins, and getting dressed in the morning is a dangerous ritual that often ends with blood on your linen undershirt. But the most bizarre fashion of all is the hennin, the iconic cone-shaped hat worn by noblewomen. These hats can be 3 feet tall, draped with expensive veils of silk and gauze that catch every breeze like a sail. You have to duck your head just to enter a room, and you live in constant fear of a sudden gust of wind snapping your neck. Beneath these towering structures, your hair is tightly braided and hidden away, because to show a single strand of loose hair is considered a scandalous invitation to sin. In this world, beauty is a burden, a heavy and restrictive cage that reminds you every second that your appearance is the only currency that matters. You look in a polished metal mirror, seeing a stranger with a plucked face and a towering head, realizing that in the Middle Ages, being fashionable is the most exhausting job of all. But your desire to be fashionable is not just limited by your vanity. It is strictly policed by the sumptuary laws. Imagine being thrown into a cold, damp dungeon simply because you chose to wear a tunic made of silk instead of coarse wool. In the eyes of the law, fashion is a weapon used to maintain the rigid boundaries of the feudal class system. If you are a merchant who has struck it rich, you still cannot wear the color purple, as that is reserved solely for royalty and the highest clergy. The length of your shoe-pointedness, the fur lining of your cloak, and even the number of buttons on your sleeves are all dictated by your birthright. To dress above your station is considered a form of social treason, an attempt to trick the world into thinking you are better than the mud you were born in. The colors that you crave are often as deadly as the diseases that haunt the city streets. To get that vibrant, deep red for a nobleman's robe, dyers use kermes made from the crushed bodies of thousands of tiny insects. But the most dangerous shade is the brilliant, unnatural green achieved by using arsenic or toxic copper salts. As you sweat under the heavy layers of your fashionable gown, your pores absorb these poisons, leading to mysterious rashes, hair loss, and a slow, agonizing decline in health. You are literally dying for fashion. But in a world where life is short and brutal, looking magnificent at a banquet is worth the risk of a premature grave. Even the way you move is a choreographed performance of restriction. Noblewomen wear girdles so tight they displace their internal organs, all to achieve the S-curve silhouette that makes them look like a delicate, swaying willow tree. You take tiny, shuffling steps because your skirts are weighted down with pounds of lead and embroidery. You cannot run, you cannot jump, and you certainly cannot breathe deeply. Your beauty is your prison, and every lace and ribbon is a bar that holds you in place. You look at the peasants in the fields, with their practical tunics and bare feet, and for a split second, you envy their freedom of movement. But then you catch a glimpse of your towering hennin in a silver basin of water, and you remember that in the Middle Ages, the more uncomfortable you are, the more powerful you seem. You adjust your silk veil, ignore the stinging rash on your neck, and prepare to spend the rest of the day standing perfectly still, a living monument to the absurdity of human vanity. In the Middle Ages, the courtroom is not a place of logic. It is a theater of divine judgment and cold iron. If you are accused of a crime, you don't wait for a jury of your peers. You wait for trial by ordeal. Imagine being forced to reach your bare hand into a cauldron of boiling water to retrieve a stone, or being made to hold a red-hot iron bar for 3 long paces. The priest then bandages your burned flesh, and you are sent back to your cold cell for 3 days. When the bandages are removed, the verdict is simple. If the wound is healing cleanly, God has declared you innocent. But if the wound is festering and rotten, it is a sign from the heavens that you are guilty, and your execution will follow immediately. To the medieval mind, your body is a canvas where God writes the truth, and pain is the only language the law understands. The punishments for those found guilty are designed to be as public and as terrifying as possible. If you are caught stealing a loaf of bread, you don't go to a modern prison. You are locked in the stocks in the village square. For hours or even days, your head and hands are trapped in heavy wooden beams while your neighbors pelt you with rotten vegetables, stones, and human waste. It is a ritual of total public humiliation, a psychological scar that never heals. For more serious crimes, the rack awaits you in the depths of the castle. You feel your joints popping and your tendons snapping as your body is slowly stretched to the breaking point. The executioner doesn't want you to die quickly. He wants you to become a living warning to everyone who dares to break the king's peace. But the ultimate terror of the medieval law is the gallows. Public executions are the biggest festivals of the year, drawing thousands of spectators who bring their children to watch the spectacle of death. You see the body swinging in the wind, left there for weeks as a gibbet to be picked apart by crows. It is a grim reminder that in this world, your life belongs to the crown, and your soul belongs to God. There is no concept of human rights here, only the rigid, unyielding grip of the iron laws that keep the chaos of the Dark Ages at bay. You walk past the rotting remains on the hill, crossing yourself in fear, realizing that in the Middle Ages, mercy is a luxury that few can afford. The law is not meant to be fair, it is meant to be unforgettable. If the trial by ordeal seems like a game of chance, the questioning in the castle dungeons is a calculated science of agony. You are taken down stone steps where the air is thick with the smell of rusted iron and old blood. The inquisitors don't just want a confession. They want to break your spirit until you admit to things you never did, just to make the pain stop. You are introduced to the scold's bridle, a terrifying iron mask designed specifically for women accused of gossiping or speaking out against the church. It features a sharp metal plate that is inserted into your mouth, resting on top of your tongue, so that any attempt to speak or scream will result in your own flesh being sliced open. You are paraded through the village wearing this metal cage, a silent, bleeding monument to the consequences of a disobedient tongue. For those accused of more spiritual crimes like witchcraft, the Iron Maiden is a legendary shadow that haunts your nightmares. It is a tall, upright sarcophagus lined with strategically placed spikes that don't pierce your vital organs immediately. Instead, as the heavy doors are slowly closed, The iron teeth sink into your flesh just enough to keep you alive and conscious for hours, or even days, in total darkness and excruciating pain. You feel the walls closing in, the cold metal biting into your eyes and chest, while the priest outside prays for the salvation of your soul. The law believes that the more your body suffers on earth, the less it will suffer in the fires of hell, a twisted logic that justifies any level of brutality. Even the way you are transported to your final judgment is a ritual of suffering. If you have committed high treason, you are not simply walked to the gallows. You are drawn on a wooden hurdle behind a horse through the filthiest gutters of the city. The crowd jeers as your skin is torn by the cobblestones, and by the time you reach the executioner, you are barely recognizable as a human being. In the Middle Ages, the law doesn't just end your life, it erases your dignity, your body, and your memory. You look up at the gray sky one last time, hearing the sharpening of the axe or the creaking of the rope, realizing that in this world, the only true justice is the silence that follows the scream. The iron laws have done their work, and the dark cycle of God and iron continues, indifferent to the tears of the innocent and the guilty alike. If you think the Middle Ages is a time of chivalrous knights and fair ladies falling in love at first sight, you are living in a fairy tale. In reality, your marriage is a cold, calculated business transaction arranged while you are still playing with wooden dolls in the dirt. You are 7 years old when your father shakes hands with the neighbor, trading your future for a few acres of pasture or a dozen healthy sheep. Love is not a requirement. It is a dangerous distraction that has no place in the rigid structure of feudal survival. By the time you are 12 or 14, you are standing in the church porch, promising to obey a man you barely know, a stranger who now owns your body and your dowry. You are told that your only purpose is to provide heirs and spares, a biological duty that often becomes a death sentence in a world without modern medicine. But the human heart is a stubborn thing, and when the arranged marriage feels like a cage, you turn to the shadows for love magic. You visit the village cunning woman in the dead of night, seeking a way to make your husband kind or to attract the attention of the blacksmith's son. She doesn't give you flowers or poetry. She gives you a recipe for a love potion that would make a modern stomach turn. You are told to grind up the bones of a green frog that has been picked clean by ants, or to mix a few drops of your own blood into his evening ale. Some superstitions even suggest baking a love cake using grain that has been sweated against your bare skin, believing your physical essence will bind his soul to yours forever. To you, these are not mere myths. They are desperate attempts to exert control over a life where you have absolutely no agency. Superstition also haunts the marriage bed, which is seen as a spiritual battlefield between God and the devil. You place a piece of iron or a sprig of St. John's wort under the mattress to prevent night hags from stealing your fertility. If you struggle to conceive, you don't visit a doctor. You go on a pilgrimage to a holy well, or tie a girdle of blessed parchment around your waist. You live in a world where every flicker of a candle and every hoot of an owl is an omen of your romantic future. Marriage is your prison, but superstition is your only hope of finding a spark of warmth in the cold, damp halls of your existence. You look at your husband across the flickering fire, wondering if the blood in his ale will finally make him love you, realizing that in the Middle Ages, affection is a miracle that must be stolen from the shadows. But the true darkness of medieval love lies in the consummation ritual, a moment that is far from private or romantic. In many noble circles, your first night as a married couple is witnessed by a crowd of family members and high-ranking officials. They stand outside your bed curtains, or sometimes even in the room itself, to ensure that the marriage is legally completed. This is not about intimacy. It is about the transfer of property and the legitimacy of future heirs. If you fail to perform under the pressure of a dozen watching eyes, the marriage can be declared null and void, bringing shame to your entire lineage. You are a pawn in a game of bloodlines, and your most private moments are treated like a public contract. When the silence of the night finally falls, you find yourself whispering to the moon, desperate for a way to bind your husband's heart to yours. You follow the instructions of a local, wise woman who tells you to find a red-headed man and steal a strand of his hair to burn with your own. If that fails, you might resort to philters made from the dried and powdered internal organs of a dove, a bird seen as a symbol of Venus. But the most extreme love charms involve the host, the sacred bread from the church. Some women are accused of stealing the consecrated bread and hiding it in their bosoms, or even feeding it to a toad, believing the divine power can be harnessed for their own romantic desires. To the church, this is the ultimate heresy. But to you, it is the only way to survive the cold indifference of an arranged life. You also live in constant fear of maleficium, or harmful magic, that could destroy your family's happiness. If your husband suddenly becomes impotent, you don't look for a physical cause. You assume a jealous neighbor has tied a witch's knot in a piece of leather. This knot is believed to magically bind a man's virility, and the only way to break the curse is to find the knot and untie it, or to find the witch and force her to bless the marriage. Your entire emotional life is a web of paranoia and spells, where every gesture and every ingredient in your stew could be a tool for love or a weapon for hate. You look at the charivari happening outside your window, the village shaming a widow for marrying a younger man, and you realize that in the Middle Ages, love is never free. It is a commodity bought with gold, protected by blood, and haunted by the shadows of 1,000 superstitions. You lie back in the darkness, the smell of burnt herbs lingering in the air, and pray that the stars have written a kinder story for your heart than the laws of men ever could. If you think living in a medieval castle is a dream of luxury, you have never felt the bone-chilling reality of a stone fortress in winter. Castles were not built for comfort. They were massive, vertical machines of war designed to keep enemies out, but they also trapped misery inside. You walk through the great hall, and the first thing you notice is that the walls are weeping with condensation, a constant dampness that rots the expensive tapestries and chills you to the marrow. There are no glass windows in the early Middle Ages, only narrow slits called loopholes that let in a freezing draft along with the gray light of a sun that never seems to reach the corners. The floor is covered in rushes, a layer of dried grass meant to act as a primitive carpet. But beneath the fresh top layer lies a disgusting compost of old food, dog droppings, and spilled ale that hasn't been cleared in years. The smell is a heavy, sweet rot that even the strongest incense cannot mask. Your private chamber is a misnomer, as you often sleep in a room filled with servants and guards for warmth and protection. The fireplace, while massive, is incredibly inefficient, sucking more heat up the chimney than it provides to the room. You spend your evenings huddled near the embers, your front burning while your back is freezing, breathing in a constant cloud of thick, acrid wood smoke. This smoke is a silent killer, slowly coating your lungs in soot and stinging your eyes until they are perpetually red and watering. And then there is the garderobe, the medieval version of a toilet. It is little more than a stone hole in the wall that drops directly into the castle moat, or a massive cesspit below. In the summer, the stench rising from these shafts is enough to make a knight faint in his armor, and the flies are a constant buzzing plague that spreads disease from the waste directly to your dining table. For the peasant in the village, the architecture is even more primitive and dangerous. Your home is a longhouse made of wattle and daub, essentially sticks held together by a mixture of mud, straw, and animal dung. You share this single, windowless room with your livestock, separated only by a low wooden partition. The heat from the cows and pigs is the only thing that keeps you alive during a blizzard, but it comes at a price. You are breathing in the fumes of animal waste and the dust from the thatched roof, which is a thriving metropolis for rats, mice, and biting insects. The center of your home is an open hearth with no chimney, just a hole in the thatch that lets out a fraction of the smoke. You live in a permanent twilight, your skin stained with soot and your clothes smelling of the fire and the farm. In the Middle Ages, your home is not a sanctuary. It is a dark, damp, and smoky cage that reminds you every day of the brutal struggle to simply exist. You look at the heavy oak door and realize that the walls aren't there to keep you safe. They are there to hold the darkness in. But the true genius of medieval architecture lies in its ability to kill you in the dark. You stand at the base of a narrow stone spiral staircase, and you notice something strange. It always winds upward in a clockwise direction. This is not an aesthetic choice. It is a cold-blooded tactical advantage. Most knights are right-handed, and as a defender retreating up the stairs, you have ample room to swing your sword around the central pillar. But for the attacker coming up from below, the stone wall blocks their right arm, leaving them cramped and vulnerable to a downward strike. The stairs are also intentionally uneven, with trip steps built at random intervals to send an unsuspecting invader tumbling into the darkness. In a medieval castle, even the floor beneath your feet is a weapon designed to break your neck. As you descend deeper into the bowels of the fortress, you encounter the oubliette, a name derived from the French word oublier, meaning to forget. This is not a regular prison cell. It is a narrow, vertical shaft in the floor, barely wide enough for a human body. You are lowered into this lightless pit by a rope, and then the heavy iron grate is locked above your head. There is no room to sit, no room to lie down, and no way to see the sun. The guards don't need to torture you with iron. They simply let the silence and the dampness of the earth erase your mind. You are forgotten by the world, left to rot among the bones of those who came before you, while life continues in the great hall just a few feet above. Even the layout of a medieval city is a masterpiece of claustrophobia and fear. The upper stories of the wooden houses lean out over the street, nearly touching each other at the top, creating a permanent tunnel of shadow. This jettying design maximizes floor space, but it also traps the smoke from thousands of fires and prevents the wind from clearing away the stench of the gutters. You walk through these canyons of rotting timber, feeling the weight of the city pressing in on you. The fire is your greatest enemy. One spark can turn the entire district into a funeral pyre in minutes, yet you have no choice but to keep the hearth burning to survive the cold. In the Middle Ages, architecture is the art of survival in a world that is constantly trying to kill you. Whether you are a king behind stone walls or a peasant in a mud hut, your home is a fortress, a prison, and a tomb all at once. you look at the massive oak beams of your ceiling and realize that every stone and every piece of wood was placed there to remind you of your own mortality. By the year 1348, the world as you know it begins to dissolve into a waking nightmare. You hear rumors from the ports of Italy about ships drifting into harbors with entire crews dead at the wheel, their skin turned a bruised, necrotic black. You don't know the word bacteria, and you have never seen a microscope, so to you, this is the literal breath of an angry god sweeping across the earth. The invisible killer arrives in your village not with a bang, but with a cough and a fever that burns like the fires of hell. You look at your neighbor and see the buboes, hideous, agonizing swellings the size of apples in the groin and armpits that ooze pus and blood. Within 3 days of the first symptom, most people are dead, their bodies piled like cordwood in the streets because the graveyards are already overflowing. The stench of decay is so thick it becomes a physical wall, a miasma of death that no bouquet of flowers can mask. In this state of total terror, the social fabric of the Middle Ages snaps like a dry twig. You watch as mothers abandon their children and priests refuse to give the last rites, terrified that a single breath will condemn them to the same dark fate. You see the flagellants marching through the mud, whipping their own backs until the bone shows, screaming for mercy from a heaven that seems to have turned its back on humanity. They believe that by spilling their own blood, they can satisfy God's wrath and stop the plague. But their open wounds only serve to spread the infection further. Law and order vanish, and you realize that your title, your land, and your gold mean nothing to a flea. The ultimate irony of the Black Death is that it is a great equalizer, killing the bishop in his palace and the beggar in the ditch with the same cold indifference. But as the population of Europe is cut in half, a strange and terrifying transformation begins to take place in the ruins of society. You are one of the few who survived, and suddenly, your labor is no longer cheap. It is the most valuable commodity in the world. With so few peasants left to work the fields, you find yourself with a power you never dreamed of, the power to say no to your lord. The feudal system, which held you in chains for centuries, begins to crumble because the invisible killer took away the people who kept it running. You walk through a ghost village, hearing only the wind whistling through empty huts, realizing that the world will never be the same again. The Black Death was the end of the Middle Ages, a brutal, bloody pruning of the human race that cleared the path for a new era. You look at your own hands, still healthy and strong, and wonder why you were spared while the rest of the world turned to ash. As the death toll reaches heights that defy human comprehension, you witness the creation of the plague pits, the final, nameless resting places for the masses. In cities like London and Paris, the consecrated ground of the churchyards is full, and the bodies are now being dumped into massive, open trenches by the hundreds. You see the death carts rattling through the cobblestone streets at midnight, the drivers ringing heavy bronze bells and crying out the chilling refrain, "Bring out your dead." There are no coffins, no shroud, and certainly no dignity, only a layer of quicklime thrown over the twisted limbs to speed up the decomposition and stifle the unbearable stench. You stand at the edge of one of these pits and realize that the person at the bottom could be a nobleman or a beggar, but in the eyes of the plague, they are exactly the same. The fear of infection leads to acts of unimaginable cruelty that reveal the darkest corners of the medieval soul. If a single member of your household is suspected of having the plague, the authorities don't take them to a hospital. They shut up your entire house. Heavy oak planks are nailed across your doors and windows from the outside, trapping the healthy in with the dying. A large red cross is painted on your door with the words, "Lord, have mercy upon us," a sentence of slow, agonizing death for everyone inside. You listen to the muffled screams of your neighbors behind those boarded windows, knowing that they are starving in the dark, surrounded by the rotting remains of their own kin. There is no escape and no mercy. The community has decided to sacrifice your entire family to save the rest of the street. Desperation drives you to seek out any cure, no matter how revolting or insane it might seem. Some physicians suggest that the plague is caused by a misalignment of the planets, while others insist it is the result of Jewish communities poisoning the wells, leading to horrific massacres across the continent. You might be told to swallow powdered emeralds if you are wealthy, or to sit in a room filled with the smoke of dried cow dung if you are poor. Some even believe that by smelling good air, they can repel the miasma, so they carry pomanders filled with ambergris or walk around with a live onion strapped to their chests. But the fleas continue to bite, and the rats continue to multiply in the filth of the abandoned houses. You realize that your world is not just dying. It is being erased by an enemy that you cannot see, hear, or fight. The invisible killer has turned your neighbors into enemies, your home into a tomb, and your faith into a hollow scream in the dark. You look at the empty chairs at your table and realize that survival is not a blessing, but a lonely, haunted burden in a world that has forgotten how to hope. If you think the law only applies to those who can speak, you are about to witness the absolute absurdity of medieval justice. In the Middle Ages, the courtroom is a stage where even a pig, a swarm of locusts, or a colony of rats can be summoned to stand trial for their crimes. Imagine walking past the village square and seeing a sow dressed in human clothes, a tiny pair of breeches and a linen vest, standing before a robed judge. This is not a joke or a festival. This is a formal legal proceeding. The pig has been accused of murder because it wandered into a cottage and bit the face of a sleeping infant. To the medieval mind, this isn't just a tragic accident. It is a moral failure that must be punished to restore the balance of the universe. The animal is assigned a defense lawyer, usually a young or struggling attorney, who tries his best to argue that the pig acted out of instinct rather than malice. But the judge is unmoved. The verdict is death by hanging, and you watch as the animal is led to the gallows, executed in public just like any human criminal. The madness of animal trials extends even to the smallest of creatures. If your fields are being destroyed by a plague of caterpillars or weevils, you don't call an exterminator. You go to the ecclesiastical court. The priest issues a formal summons, ordering the insects to appear in court on a specific Tuesday to answer for their theft of the village's grain. When the insects, predictably, fail to show up, the judge declares them contumacious and issues an official decree of excommunication. You stand in the field as the priest reads the holy ban, threatening the caterpillars with the fires of hell if they do not leave the parish immediately. If the pests happen to disappear shortly after, the villagers rejoice in the power of the church. If they stay, it is simply because the village's sins were too great for the curse to work. But there is a darker psychological layer to these bizarre trials. By putting animals on trial, the medieval authorities are trying to impose a sense of order on a chaotic and terrifying world. If a beast can be held responsible for its actions, then the world is not random. It is a place of rules and consequences. You live in a world where the devil can take many forms, and a black cat or a wandering dog might just be a familiar sent to spy on your soul. These trials are a desperate attempt to assert human dominance over the wild, unpredictable forces of nature. You look at the empty noose in the square, still swaying after the execution of a horse, and realize that in the Middle Ages, the line between man and beast is a thin, bloody thread. Justice is a performance meant to satisfy an invisible God, and in this theater of the absurd, no creature is too small to escape the cold iron of the law. But the true peak of this legal theater occurred in the early 16th century, during the famous trial of the rats of autumn. The rats were accused of feloniously eating and destroying the local barley crop, and they were summoned to appear before the ecclesiastical court. A young lawyer named Bartholomew Chassanet was appointed as their defense counsel, and he didn't treat it as a joke. He treated it as the case of his career. When the rats failed to show up for the first hearing, Chassanet argued that the summons was too narrow. He pointed out that his clients were scattered across many villages, and a single announcement at the local church wasn't enough to notify all the rats in the region. The judge, remarkably, agreed and ordered the summons to be read in every parish where the rats resided. At the next hearing, the rats were still missing, and Chassanet reached for his most brilliant legal maneuver yet. He argued that the rats were willing to come to court, but they were terrified of the deadly enemies that patrolled the roads, the village cats. He claimed that his clients had a legal right to safe conduct to and from the courtroom, and since the plaintiffs could not guarantee that the cats would be locked up, the rats could not be blamed for their absence. The court was stumped by this logic, and the trial was postponed indefinitely, leaving the rats of autumn to feast on the barley in peace. You watch this spectacle and realize that the law in the Middle Ages is a labyrinth where logic and insanity are the same thing. These trials also serve a darker, more superstitious purpose: to identify familiars. If a woman is accused of witchcraft, her pet cat, dog, or even a toad might be put on trial alongside her. They believe the animal is not a creature of nature, but a demon in disguise that suckles on the witch's blood to gain dark powers. The animal is searched for devil's marks, and if a strange patch of skin is found, the beast is burned at the stake or drowned alongside its owner. You live in a world where a wagging tail or a soft purr could be evidence of a pact with Satan. In the Middle Ages, the courtroom is a place where the human soul and the animal spirit are weighed on the same broken scales. You look at the stray dog in the gutter and realize that in this world, even the most innocent creature is just one crime away from the hangman's noose. Forget the fairy tales of shining armor and noble quests, because the reality of being a medieval knight is a brutal, grimy, and bone-breaking existence. If you saw a knight in the year 1400, you wouldn't be struck by his gallantry, but by the overwhelming stench of rusted iron, stale sweat, and horse manure. A knight's suit of plate armor can weigh over 60 pounds, and once you are strapped into it, you are effectively a prisoner in a metal oven. Imagine spending 12 hours under a scorching sun in a suit that traps every ounce of your body heat and provides no ventilation. There are no zippers or quick-release buckles. If you have a sudden attack of dysentery in the middle of a march, you have no choice but to soil yourself inside the armor. By the end of a campaign, a knight is often encrusted in a layer of his own waste, blood, and the grease used to keep the metal from seizing up. The chivalric code you hear about in poems is largely a medieval PR campaign designed to keep these violent men from tearing society apart. In reality, a knight is a professional thug, a highly trained killing machine whose primary job is to exert the Lord's will through extreme violence. When you are not at war, you spend your days in tournaments, which are far from the polite sporting events shown in movies. These are chaotic, bloody melees where men are routinely trampled to death or have their lungs pierced by splintered wooden lances. The goal isn't just glory. It's to capture your opponent and hold him for a massive ransom, stripping him of his horse and armor to enrich yourself. You live for the chevauchée, a terrifying military tactic where you ride through enemy territory, burning crops, slaughtering livestock, and terrorizing unarmed peasants. The physical toll on your body is catastrophic. Your joints are permanently swollen from the weight of the steel, and your face is a map of scars from training accidents and battlefield wounds. Because your helmet, or bassinet, has only tiny slits for vision, you are fighting in a state of near blindness, relying on instinct and the terrifying strength of your arms to crush skulls. You don't fight for justice or the weak. You fight for land, for loot, and for the sheer adrenaline of the kill. When the battle is over, you don't ride off into the sunset with a lady. You collapse in a muddy tent, your skin raw from the gambeson padding, and your mind haunted by the screams of the men you've butchered. In the Middle Ages, a knight is not a hero of romance. He is a necessary evil, a dark shadow in iron that keeps the feudal world turning through fear and steel. You look at your blood-stained gauntlets and realize that the only shining thing about you is the glint of your blade in the dark. To understand the reality of a knight, you must understand that his armor is not just a uniform. It is a crushing financial and physical burden. The cost of a full suit of plate armor, along with a stable of war horses and the squires needed to maintain them, is equivalent to buying a modern fighter jet. You are a walking investment, and your entire family's fortune is strapped to your back every time you ride into the mud. But the steel that protects you from the sword is also slowly destroying your skeleton from the inside out. Modern forensic analysis of medieval knight skeletons reveals a haunting pattern of Osgood-Schlatter disease and severe spinal misalignment. Your vertebrae are compressed and fused from years of supporting 60 pounds of steel while being jolted by the rhythmic pounding of a galloping horse. Your knees are blown out, and your shoulders are permanently hunched from the weight of the hauberk and the heavy shield you carry for hours on end. The violence you inflict is matched only by the trauma you endure behind the visor. Because a knight is too valuable to kill, the goal of your enemies is to unhorse you and beat you into submission. You have felt the sickening thud of a mace against your helmet, a blow that didn't break the steel but sent a shockwave through your skull, leaving you with a permanent brain injury. You spend your life in a fog of concussions, your ears constantly ringing, and your vision blurred by the repeated blunt force trauma of the tournament circuit. When a knight is finally taken, he is pinned to the ground like a beetle on its back, his heavy armor making it impossible for him to stand up without help. In those terrifying seconds, as a common foot soldier stands over you with a misericord, a thin dagger designed to slip through the eye slits of your helmet, you realize that all your wealth and titles cannot save you from a piece of sharpened iron. Even your leisure time is a preparation for death. You practice the art of combat until your hands are a mass of scar tissue and broken knuckles. You are taught to use your armored fist as a hammer, your elbows as spikes, and your forehead as a ram. Chivalry doesn't tell you how to help the poor. It tells you how to efficiently butcher another man in a way that preserves your honor and your ransom value. You look at the tapestry in the hall showing a clean, noble knight on a white horse, and you spit on the floor. You know the truth. You are a scarred, aching, and blood-soaked survivor of a world that values the shine of your steel more than the man inside it. In the Middle Ages, being a knight is not a dream of glory. It is a slow, agonizing transformation into a living weapon that eventually rusts and breaks like everything else in the Dark Ages. If you think your modern college years are stressful, imagine pursuing a degree in the year 1200, where the classroom is a cold stone floor, and your only textbook is a single, hand-copied manuscript that costs more than a peasant's farm. To be a student at the dawn of the first universities is to enter a world of intellectual combat, where words are as sharp as swords, and a single grammatical error can result in public shaming. You wake up long before dawn to the sound of a monastery bell, your fingers numb as you clutch a quill made from a goose feather. There are no chairs and no desks. You sit on a pile of straw in a drafty hall, listening to a master lecture in Latin for 6 hours straight. If you don't understand Latin, you don't belong here. Because in the Middle Ages, the language of the elite is the only bridge to the divine and the scientific. The education you receive is built on the trivium and the quadrivium, a rigid curriculum designed to sharpen your mind into a razor-like instrument of logic. You spend years debating scholasticism, a method of learning that values authority and ancient texts over observation or experiment. You might find yourself in a heated, 3-day public debate over a question that seems absurd to a modern mind. How many angels can dance on the head of a needle? This isn't just a waste of time. It is a test of your ability to navigate the complex labyrinth of theology and Aristotelian logic without falling into the trap of heresy. The stakes are incredibly high. If your logic strays too far from church doctrine, you aren't just failing a class, you are risking a visit from the Inquisition. But life as a medieval student is not all dusty books and silent prayers. In cities like Paris or Bologna, you are part of a universitas, a guild of scholars that is often at war with the local townsfolk. You are a young, hot-blooded man in a city filled with expensive ale and dangerous ideas. History is filled with town and gown riots, where students and citizens beat each other to death over a disputed tavern bill or a perceived insult to a master's honor. As a student, you are technically under the protection of the church, which means the local police cannot arrest you, leading to a culture of academic lawlessness. You might spend your night brawling in an alleyway, and your morning reciting the works of Augustine, living a double life of spiritual devotion and secular chaos. The final test for your degree is a grueling oral examination that can last an entire day, conducted by a panel of masters who are looking for any crack in your intellectual armor. There is no C grade in the Middle Ages. You either master the universal truths, or you remain a clerk forever, destined to a life of copying boring legal documents in a cold scriptorium. You look at the ink stains on your calloused fingers and the hollows under your eyes, realizing that in this world, knowledge is not just power. It is a sacred burden. In the Middle Ages, the mind of the elite is a fortress, built to withstand the darkness of ignorance, even if the stones are laid with the sweat of dogmatic obsession. You close your heavy book, the smell of old parchment and candle wax filling your senses, knowing that you are part of the very few who will ever truly understand the secret clockwork of the medieval universe. But the trauma of a medieval education begins long before you reach the university, in the cold, shadow-filled grammar schools run by the church. To learn was to suffer, and the birch rod was considered the most effective teaching tool in the master's arsenal. If you stumbled over a Latin declension or failed to memorize a passage of Virgil, you weren't just corrected. You were stripped and beaten in front of your peers. They believed that the rod gives wisdom, and a student who didn't bleed during his lessons was a student who wasn't truly learning. By the time you reached the university, your body was as scarred as your mind was sharp, a testament to the brutal discipline required to escape the ignorance of the masses. The physical objects of your study are as precious as gold and twice as difficult to produce. You don't just buy a book. You commission a masterpiece that takes months or even years of human labor to create. You watch the monks in the scriptorium, their backs hunched and their eyesight failing as they scrape the hair from dried calfskin to create vellum. Every letter is written with a goose quill that must be sharpened every few minutes, and the ink is a volatile mixture of iron galls and soot that eats into the page. If a scribe makes a single mistake after 6 months of work, he must painstakingly scrape the parchment thin with a razor to erase the error. This is why books are chained to the desks in the library. They are so valuable that a single volume could buy an entire village. You realize that a library is not a place for browsing, but a sacred treasury where the collective memory of humanity is guarded by iron and stone. Even the way you see the world is shaped by the obsession with authority over evidence. If a text by Aristotle says that a fly has 8 legs, you will believe it even if you are staring at a 6-legged fly on your own wall. In the Middle Ages, the written word of the ancients is more real than the world beneath your fingernails. You spend your nights memorizing the glossa ordinaria, layers of commentary, written by centuries of monks that surround the original biblical text like a dense, intellectual forest. Your mind becomes a labyrinth of citations and footnotes, a world where original thought is seen as the dangerous precursor to heresy. In this era, to be educated is to be a guardian of the past, a silent sentinel standing at the edge of an abyss of forgotten knowledge. You close your eyes, feeling the weight of the centuries pressing down on your tired brain, knowing that every word you read is a small, flickering candle in a world that is still very much in love with the dark. When the church bell tolls for curfew, literally meaning cover the fire, the medieval world transforms into a realm of deep shadows and forbidden chaos. In the city, the gates are locked, and heavy iron chains are stretched across the streets to stop the movement of horses and suspicious strangers. But behind the shuttered windows of the local tavern, a different kind of life is pulsing in the dark. You enter a room thick with the smell of cheap ale, roasting grease, and the unwashed bodies of sailors, thieves, and weary laborers. The ale stake outside the door, a long pole decorated with a bush of ivy, is the only neon sign you need to find this den of iniquity. Here, the rigid social hierarchy of the day begins to dissolve in a haze of gambling and loud, drunken laughter. You watch as men bet their last copper coins on a game of hazard, a dice game so addictive that it has ruined entire noble families in a single night. The flickering candlelight hides the faces of the dice twirlers who use weighted bones to cheat the unsuspecting, and a knife fight is never more than a spilled drink away. But the nightlife isn't just about the taverns, it is defined by the Feast of Fools, a brief window of sanctioned madness where the world is turned upside down. For one night, the lowly altar boys dress in the bishop's robes and lead a donkey into the cathedral, braying in mockery of the Holy Mass. The peasants wear masks made of animal skins and dance through the muddy streets, fueled by a desperate need to release the pressure of a year spent in silent obedience. In the darkness, The mummers perform lewd plays on the back of wooden wagons, their faces painted with soot to hide their identities from the local bailiffs. You feel the energy of a society that is constantly on the edge of a riot, a world where the line between a celebration and a massacre is dangerously thin. Outside the city walls, the night belongs to a different kind of terror, the supernatural night hags and werewolves. You don't walk through the woods after dark without a consecrated candle or a piece of iron hidden in your pocket. Every snapping twig is the footstep of a demon, and every howl of a wolf is a lost soul crying out for blood. The darkness is not just an absence of light. It is a physical entity, a thick, suffocating blanket that holds all the fears of the dark ages. You huddle in your bed, listening to the wind whistle through the thatch, knowing that the only thing protecting you from the chaos outside is a thin wooden door and a whispered prayer. In the Middle Ages, the night is a gamble with your soul, a time when the laws of men sleep and the ancient spirits of the earth wake up to play. You close your eyes, the taste of bitter ale still on your tongue, and wait for the morning bell to bring back the cold, orderly reality of the day. But the true spirit of the medieval night is found in the tabard, a place where the air is so thick with smoke and desperation you can almost taste it. You watch as a group of soldiers, their armor still stained with the day's toil, huddle over a stained wooden table for a game of queek. This isn't just a simple game of pebbles and a checkered board. It is a high-stakes battle of wits and deception, where men lose their horses, their family rings, and sometimes even their freedom. If you are caught using Fulhams, dice loaded with lead to always land on a lucky 6, the punishment isn't a fine. It's a broken hand or a knife in the dark. In the Middle Ages, the tavern is a sanctuary for the sinner, a place where the priest's sermons are drowned out by the clinking of pewter tankards and the shouting of wassail. As the night deepens, the entertainment takes a darker, more bloodthirsty turn in the back alleys of the city. You stand in a circle of cheering peasants, watching a bear baiting or a cockfight, where animals are forced to tear each other apart for the amusement of the crowd. The screams of the beasts and the smell of fresh blood on the straw create a primal energy that shocks your modern senses. This is the only theater the common man can afford, a brutal reflection of the violence they witness in their own lives every single day. To you, this isn't cruelty. It is the natural order of a world where everything, including your own life, is a struggle for dominance. But even in the middle of the loudest tavern brawl, a sudden silence can fall when the watch passes by outside. These are the city's unofficial police, men armed with halberds and lanterns, searching for night walkers who have no legitimate business in the streets. If you are caught outside without a light, you are treated as a thief or an assassin, dragged to the cage to be mocked by the morning sun. You realize that the night is a fragile bubble of freedom, constantly threatened by the iron fist of the law and the invisible terrors of the supernatural. The flickering candle on your table burns low, casting long, distorted shadows that look like the dancing will-o'-the-wisps from the local legends. You finish your last drop of sour wine, feeling the exhaustion of a world that never truly rests, even when the sun goes down. In the Middle Ages, the night is not a time for peace. It is a chaotic, beautiful, and terrifying theater where the soul of humanity bared its teeth in the dark. As the 15th century draws to a close, the heavy, rusted gears of the medieval world begin to grind to a halt. You stand on the threshold of a new age, feeling the ground shift beneath your feet as the old certainties of the feudal system crumble into dust. The Black Death was the first blow, a scythe that cut through the population and left the survivors with a dangerous new sense of their own value. You see a peasant who once bowed his head in the dirt, now demanding higher wages and better rights, a spark of rebellion that the lords can no longer extinguish with the sword. The divine right of kings is still whispered in the cathedrals, but the rise of the merchant class and the growing wealth of the cities have created a new power that doesn't rely on bloodlines. Gold is becoming more powerful than land, and the pen is beginning to challenge the authority of the iron mace. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg is the final nail in the coffin of the Dark Ages. Knowledge is no longer a secret treasure chained to a stone desk in a monastery. It is a flood that is starting to drown the old superstitions. You watch as a single printed page travels faster than 1,000 hand-copied manuscripts, spreading ideas that challenge the church and the crown. The age of discovery is beckoning from across the ocean, as ships sail further into the unknown than any medieval mapmaker ever dared to dream. You look at the horizon and realize that the world is much larger, much older, and much more complicated than the priests ever told you. The second sleep is over. Humanity is waking up to the dawn of the Renaissance, an era of art, science, and a new focus on the individual. But as you leave the Middle Ages behind, you realize that you are carrying its scars and its lessons with you into the future. We owe this dark era, the birth of our universities, our legal systems, and the magnificent cathedrals that still touch the clouds today. The Middle Ages was not just 1,000 years of misery. It was 1,000 years of human endurance, of finding beauty in the mud and hope in the middle of a plague. It was a world of extremes, where the cruelest iron met the softest silk, and where the human spirit was tested by fire and ice. You look back at the flickering torchlight of the castle one last time, before stepping into the bright, uncertain light of the modern world. The Middle Ages is dead, but its blood still flows through our veins, a haunting reminder of where we came from and how much we have overcome. You take a deep breath of the morning air, knowing that while the darkness has passed, the story of your survival is just beginning.